I call this meeting of the House Financing and Policy Committee to order. Let it be known we do have quorum here today, and our first order of business is to approve last meeting's minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Representative Mecklin moves the minutes. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. All right, so we kind of have a full agenda here today. We're going to be hearing from a lot of different industry leaders on the state of housing in the state of Minnesota. So I think how we're going to run this today is we'll have our presenters come up, give their presentation, and then we'll open up for questions when they are done. So with that, first we have Housing First. If you want to come up and start your presentation, and please introduce yourself for the record. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Chair Igo and committee members. My name is Mark Foster. I'm the Vice President of Legislative and Political Affairs with Housing First Minnesota. I do apologize, technology issues, won't be able to have it on the screen, so I'll follow along with your packets. But brief background on Housing First Minnesota. We are a trade association of nearly 1,000 members of the home building industry that have one goal in mind: advancing home ownership opportunities for all Minnesotans. Our members build the American dream across the state, building thousands of homes each year. Thank you for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you this afternoon to discuss those home ownership opportunities and how the home building industry is working to meet the needs of Minnesotans. Looking into the new year, our concerns about the future of home ownership in Minnesota continue to grow. As you may be well aware, our housing market is chronically undersupplied, but the demand to own a house remains. Unfortunately, on the regular, home buyers are getting priced out, especially younger buyers. In part, this is causing the national median age of a first-time buyer to hit 38 years old, an all-time high. As it sits today, Minnesota's housing market is far from healthy. So how did we get here? Ever since the housing depression from 2007 to 2009, we simply haven't built enough homes. As the chart in your packet shows, the decade from 2010 to 2019 was far and away the decade with the least amount of housing activity over the past 60 years. But at the same time, our population and household formation continued to grow as a state and region. Today, statewide, as many of you are well aware, we are nearly 100,000 units short of a healthy housing market. And this includes everything: apartments, condos, townhouses, single-family homes. You may not be able to see it on the map that's in black and white, but of the country. But Minnesota's a brown state. If you're a brown or yellow state on this map, you've got a big problem. So, unfortunately, here in Minnesota, our numbers, by many standards, are alarmingly some of the worst in the nation. The next chart with the Minnesota housing deficit shows that based off a starting point recommended by Governor Dayton's task force back in 2018, we needed 300,000 homes by 2030 in order to have a more equal supply to demand. In 2021, we actually started to make a slight dent into the deficit. Unfortunately, we lost almost all of that progress from 2022 to 2024, in large part to rising interest rates. And now our deficit is larger than when we started in 2018. And the homes that we do build are unattainable for too many. The median new single-family detached house has now gone north of $530,000 in the state. The next map shows the median price of a new home in Minnesota and compares us to all of our surrounding neighbors. As you can see, the median price in Minnesota is nearly $100,000 more than all of our competitors. Housing is very much an economic competitiveness issue, and unfortunately, Minnesota's losing. Just as recently as 2020, nearly 50% of MSP households could afford a new house, with the rolling 20-year average at roughly 45%. The chart in your packet shows that today, only 27% of MSP households can afford to buy a new house. Now, part of that is stubbornly high interest rates, and obviously this committee can't do much about those, but that's what's happening in the market. In the next chart, again, you won't be able to see it in your packet in the black and white, but you want as much red and gray as possible, as those homes are built under $450,000. And as you can see, we are losing to our Midwest peers by quite a bit with Chicago, Milwaukee, Nashville, Indianapolis. What we like to say is our competitors in the Midwest building more at that lower price point. And then in the next chart, you want to be as far to the left as possible, as it shows market rate under 300,000. The MSP MSA ranks more with the likes of the cities on the coast. So at this point, you might be wondering, why is a spokesperson for the housing industry explaining how expensive their product has become? It's simple, really. It's because it doesn't have to be this way. Our industry has been raising supply and affordability concerns for nearly a decade, but the desperately needed policy solutions that have been proposed have yet to be enacted in a meaningful way. It's because our industry is seriously concerned about the state of the housing market, the state of home ownership, and the future of Minnesota. Housing affordability is quickly becoming the issue of our time. Now, of course, there are many factors that contribute to the cost of a new home: land, building materials, labor, and most notably, laws and regulatory requirements. Our members work through these dynamics every day in order to bring more housing online, but it isn't easy and continues to get more difficult. Despite that, we are attempting to meet consumers where they are. In many instances, they continue to call for greater density, smaller homes on smaller lots, less demand for garage space. While not all consumers are asking for these items, there's a growing segment of first-time buyers, single people, and downsizers that are. And of course, with the new work-from-home world, consumers' demands are changing. We know that the housing supply issue will not solve itself. Homes simply do not just appear, and we remain, as the industry, committed for the long term. So this is a topic that's gained intense coverage in the past few years all over the country. And there's the slide with lots of housing discussion on it. This slide has something for everybody. 3 Republican governors, 3 Democrat governors, all with a very similar message: remove exclusionary roadblocks to allow for the creation of more housing supply. All of these governors have concluded that housing supply and housing affordability is an issue that their state legislatures and executive branches must address. Yielding to local governments alone to fix the issue is not working in these states either. Finally, we are dedicated to continuing to build the safest, most durable, and energy-efficient homes in the country. We always protect the environment. The industry is proud to pay good wages. All of these are guiding principles for our members. As I mentioned earlier, we are committed to providing consumers with more choice. There's a massive market for starter homes, modest homes, functional space on small lots. Homeowners know how large they want their garage to be. Homeowners know how many trees they want in their yard. Homeowners know whether or not they need upgraded stone exteriors for their homes. Unfortunately, many policies in Minnesota's growing cities do not allow for this type of homeowner choice. As I continue to talk, I want to briefly show you some examples of starter homes, primarily from other parts of the country. If you flip through your packet, it's under starter home examples. There was a time post-World War II when a small home on a small lot was a centerpiece of the American dream. Back then, we couldn't build them fast enough. There are many examples of these neighborhoods in parts of St. Paul, Minneapolis, and the first-ring suburbs. And as we built, we saw families grow and flourish, generational wealth created, and communities strengthened. Home ownership in a safe, durable home was the goal then. Unfortunately, somehow we lost our way in that simple foundational premise. In 2025, we find ourselves again in this position, where recommitting to building starter homes can help our communities flourish and meet the demand for housing. I want to show you a prime example of these homes built on a smaller lot with the Housing First Minnesota Foundation. They're working to end homelessness in Minnesota. So this house was built on a smaller lot in North St. Paul. It was built by, like I mentioned, our foundation with our build partners, Lennar and MacV, as part of our work to end homelessness in Minnesota. Built in 2020, this building now serves as a transitional home for homeless veterans. This home is illegal to build in most growing cities. Let me repeat that. This house is illegal to build without asking for variances that can dramatically increase the price of a home. And if I could pivot right there just for a moment, If this committee does one thing this year that would make a substantial difference, it would be to fix the way residential development processes are approved. In far too many instances, we are essentially buying zoning. Very few projects can meet the criteria that municipal governments lay out as base level zoning. So roughly 70 to 80% of new housing in Minnesota is negotiated by planned unit development. And every time that PUDs are involved, the housing gets more expensive. Once again, this is unique to Minnesota. Quickly back to the work of the foundation. Since 2017, we've worked with our build partners to build 15 Housing for Heroes homes, and our latest home is to be complete this year. And then if you flip through some of the slides, this work has led us to start development on the first ever multi-unit complex Veteran Village in the city of Eagan with our partners McAfee and Lennar again. And this innovative project will provide stable long-term housing paired with ongoing support services for veterans facing significant barriers to housing stability, and provide an effective end of veteran homelessness in Minnesota, hopefully by the end of this year. This work is truly having an impact for hundreds of Minnesotans. And like I said, a few more slides of our work being done through our foundation across different communities of the state. So in conclusion, Minnesota's housing market is dramatically undersupplied. We're losing to our neighbors on a number of fronts, but especially on affordability. There's no debate that the status quo housing policies that exist today are not working. And for the sake of the next generation of homebuyers, we need to remove exclusionary roadblocks and outdated housing policies, and we need your help doing it. So once again, Chair Igo and members, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee, and we look forward to working with you all this session to address our housing supply and affordability issues and say yes to more homes.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Foster. It looks like Representative Scraba has our first question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll find it here. Hold on. Mr. Foster, you repeat what you think about zoning. I'm a former zoning commissioner chair in St. Louis County in Ely or in northern Minnesota, and I've always been let the communities decide their own zoning what they want. But again, I can be convinced if you think that should come from higher up or whatever.
Yeah.
Mr. Foster.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and Representative, it's been since about the early 90s since the state legislature took a meaningful glance at land use and zoning for municipal governments. And like I mentioned in my testimony, the current slate is not working for the housing market in general. Most housing developments, especially here in the MSP region, get approved by planned unit development process, and that's unique to Minnesota. There's a piece I'm happy to share with you that calls us a land of 10,000 PUDs, because that's how we approve housing here. And any time that we go into a PUD, my folks, developers, builders, it becomes a negotiation between the government that's approving the project and my folks. And typically the cost of the new homes that are coming online get increased, and the amount of homes that we're allowed to bring online gets decreased.
Representative Scraba.
Thank you, Chair, and Mr. Foster. So would you, I know I'm not going to get what I want right here, because I need to talk to you at length about this, because I think it's important that I understand. Is the size of a community like 5,000 people, 3,000, 100, does it matter in the metro area? Or is this all from bigger communities that you're having this problem with?
Mr. Foster.
Chair and Representative, most of where we're building today in the growing cities within the MSP region, which is where most of new housing is built in Minnesota, is where we're running into these obstacles. Like I mentioned, running into 3-car garage mandates, certain types of mandates that go above and beyond building and energy code, which we want to meet, and we're happy to do that, but go above and beyond for just aesthetic reasons, that's where we're running into more of those roadblocks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, next on the list, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Foster, good to see you. You had alluded to in your testimony a desire to look at some of the aesthetic mandate requirements, and you were just talking about that with Representative Scraba. Just because in the last 2 years we've heard some refrains about the need to not make changes to the aesthetic mandate, can you just let us know, are any of the aesthetic properties or qualities that you builders put on the houses, are those directly affected by the building code, or do they affect the structural integrity or energy or integrity or anything with a house?
Mr. Foster.
Chair Igo and Representative Nash. So at this moment, the building and energy code is being discussed within the Department of Labor and Industry. We have a representative as the industry as well. And so that's what, like I said, we want to meet that base level. What we run into in many communities is above and beyond. So I'll give you an example of requiring stone exterior on one side of a house is about a $5,000 increase to the cost of the house. We have some communities where we run into the community will only approve the project if we have 4 sides of stone exterior. Well, that's a $20,000 increase, and we're pricing out many Minnesota families when we do that. And don't get me wrong, many consumers want that upgrade, and we're happy to do it. But to make that the base level by which we can build today, it's pricing Minnesotans out of home ownership.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and then I'll be done. So just to crystallize this, if a buyer wants to put something on the exterior of their home that is above and beyond the mandatory building code requirements, they should be able to do so, but not prescribed to do so. And you and I have worked together on this issue, and I remember a study from, I believe it was the National Association of Realtors that said that for every $1,000 that is added onto the price of a house, you're pricing 4,000 people, potential buyers, out of purchasing that house. So in the example that you just gave of $20,000 associated with putting stone exterior, which has nothing to do with the structural integrity or the energy efficiency of the house, on the exterior of the house, you've priced thousands of people out of the opportunity to buy that house. That's both very bad and very fixable, in my opinion, and I think that, I hope that our committee puts great effort into talking about things just as simple as that. So if my wife and I, who live in a cedar-sided home, were to choose to build another cedar-sided home, that's our choice. But I don't want to have a gun held to my head to say that you have to do that, along with a third-car garage or any of the other things. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Nash. Cedar-sided houses are great until the woodpeckers take over, like they did on mine.
I'm living that right now.
Next on the list is Representative Myers.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Foster, I just wanted to highlight, the work that you guys are doing through the Housing First Minnesota Foundation. A lot of, different projects that you guys are working on, and I do really want to highlight one that's not in my district, but super close, and that's the Hope House. I was excited to actually see it in there. I've been over there a couple times. That has a big impact, from my community over there for, single mothers, kids, young adults. So I just wanted to highlight that and say thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Representative Myers. And then last on the list is Representative Johnson. Oh, and then Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I'd like to get your opinion. What's your opinion on homeowners associations? Because when we're talking about cost of housing, I can tell you every development goes in with the homeowners association. And in my area, it gets a pool, it gets whatever, even the townhomes. And you see, oh, nice price home. But there's a homeowners association that adds about $200, $300, $400 a month to the price. So I was just curious what your thoughts are on those.
And Mr. Frost, before we begin, I think that's going to be a huge topic that we'll be discussing in this committee. That might actually be another hearing where we're going to be having, kind of diving into that. But with that, to you, Mr. Foster.
Yeah, Chair, I go and Representative. Yeah, HOAs are a whole nother ball of wax. I think a task group has been working on that. We actually presented in front of that task group a couple weeks ago. And there's a demand for certain types of HOAs that do base level trash, that's about it. I mean, maybe keeping up monuments and the like. And then there's community club type association that there's a demand for that as well. Where we run into problems is, again, getting pushed into the creation of HOAs when the development shouldn't require that or doesn't need it. There's oftentimes that, once again, city governments will either create a policy or come up to the line, and the only way to address a certain issue is to create an HOA when we otherwise would prefer not to create an HOA.
Thank you. And our last question, Representative Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not so much a question, just good questions that we've all asked, but the aesthetics, the energy efficiency, the HOA, CICs, I'm actually on that work group. I think we're going to have a lot of constructive conversations to be had this year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Eklund. And thank you, Mr. Foster.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Next on the list, we have the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. Welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Chair Igo, members of the committee, thank you. Sorry, I'm short. I got to pull up here. My name is Elizabeth Wafel. I'm a shareholder at Flaherty & Hood, and I'm here on behalf of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, where I work on land use, housing, and similar issues. For those unfamiliar with us, the CGMC is an organization of more than 100 cities located outside the MSP area. From La Crescent to Ely to Thief River Falls, Laverne, and more. Our biggest members are Moorhead and Mankato, and our smallest members are probably familiar to the chair, Nashwauk and Keewatin. And the one thing I think that all of these cities have in common and that we agree with Housing First is the desperate need for housing in our communities. You know, I started working with the CGMC about 15 years ago, and I'll be honest, housing wasn't part of our policy platform. I think you may remember that, former mayor. It just wasn't something we worked on. But within the next few years, it became a hotter and hotter topic, and we've increasingly been working on this organization, or excuse me, as an organization, been increasingly working on this issue. It's also important to us that as an organization that we are really tapped into what our members think and what they're doing on these issues. So this summer, we actually did a survey of all of our members. We had about half respond to it. So a lot of my comments are going to reflect what we heard from the members. Now, you'll see in your packet a joint handout from us and from the Greater Minnesota Partnership. My colleague, Darielle Dannon, is probably going to speak to more of the details in terms of what we exactly need. But what I want to talk about is sort of what our cities have been telling us in terms of what they need. You know, and so my comments are going to focus on three things: the challenges we face. Most importantly, though, I think the actions that cities are taking on this and the assistance that we need from the legislature, and in some cases, what we don't need. Starting off at the top, biggest challenge that our cities face is market failure. You know, you heard just now how much a house costs, you know, primarily in the metropolitan area. It costs almost the same in Greater Minnesota, but the challenge is that a lot of our residents can't afford that. It costs as much often to build, you know, in your smallest of cities as it does, you know, down here, and that becomes a big problem for our cities. A second problem that our cities really face is the infrastructure to support housing. You know, when we are adding housing, if you're adding infill, you know, the infrastructure may not be large enough. If you're adding outfill, you know, we've got a lot of cities that are like, we have the land to build. We can do this. We can do it whatever density you want. We don't have the sewer and water to support it. And it's really expensive to be installing. You know, then I would say the other thing we're missing, and again, I think probably most of the developers would agree with this too, is that we're really lacking gaps in the continuum of housing. The cities of Greater Minnesota are a wonderful place to live. I, in fact, encourage all of you to think about retiring out there or living out even younger years there. But, you know, in many of our cities, there are gaps in the housing continuum, particularly in starter or workforce housing or in senior housing. And those gaps compound problems. If a senior is living in a perfect house for a family, but they can't move elsewhere, that's like not freeing up some of the starter homes. So there's a lot of challenges there. One other challenge I do want to point out, and again, it's on the handout, is developers. Is that again is one of the other challenges that we face, because when you're growing in greater Minnesota, you're not growing in the leaps and bounds that you are seeing in a lot of the suburban and exurban areas. You're adding more housing, but it's not at a rate to keep, a developer in business full time there. So it is also much more challenging for us to even get people in there to build. And it's going to take some creative solutions to try and address those issues. Talking about what our cities are doing, I think it's really important to recognize that our cities are not sitting on their hands. We are obviously lobbying at the legislature, talking to you about what we need, but they're also doing a lot on their own. They're really putting skin in the game. And in fact, it's hard to find housing development out in greater Minnesota where the city hasn't stepped forward to do something. Sometimes they're investing money, helping to fill the gap in financing, because we see a lot of gaps out there when housing is getting built. They might be donating land, they might be doing swaps, doing tax increment finance, tax abatement to try and kickstart housing. We've been seeing more and more putting housing trust funds. Across the board, where housing is getting built, it's getting done because our cities are stepping up to do so. Second thing they're doing, and again related to this, is really engaging in partnerships. They're trying to, do what they can to bring in developers, work with foundations, nonprofits, the counties, private industry, and more. We've got private industries across the state who are trying to help build housing. It's just really challenging. And then the final thing I want to mention that they're doing is that they're rethinking and revising how they approach land use and related requirements. If you've been around here, you've heard a lot of talk about, we need to change this zoning requirement and that zoning requirement. During our survey, at least half of our members said that they are either in the process of or have updated their zoning code within the last 10 years. A lot of things they're doing, they're updating their parking requirements, they're narrowing their lot sizes, they're increasing density, they're allowing for ADUs and more. A lot of the things that you will hear we want done. I think what's most important and what's notable about that, though, is that they are doing it in a way that's tailored to their cities, to their unique geography, their unique infrastructure, and their unique needs. And they've been investing monies to do so. I just heard this summer when some of the zoning discussions were going on, I had one of my cities call me up and be like, we're working with our county and spending $500,000, they got some of that from a foundation and so forth, to redo our entire, land use zoning plan so that we can increase density, we can do more housing. And they're like, please don't make us have to do this all over again after we're getting it done. So cities are investing the time and money to think about this and trying to get it done. So that's what they're doing. But what do they need? And I think you're going to hear this from a number of the other cities testifiers as well. We so greatly appreciate all of the funding that the Minnesota legislature put into housing back in 2023. More than $1 billion invested. But it's been very, very slow to roll out. For example, the Greater Minnesota Housing Infrastructure Grant Program provided a much smaller amount than it's needed, but they are providing an amount. Still haven't seen the applications. Things are, you know what I'm talking about. It's rolling out slow. It's a challenge. So that's number one. It's whatever you can do to get those funds out faster. Second thing is invest in the infrastructure grant and workforce housing programs. I know this is a tight budget year. I haven't been hiding under too much of a rock, but there's not a lot of money to invest. But to the extent there are, again, trying to help us on the infrastructure and pieces like that. And then policy changes. I'm going to let some of the other city lobbyists dive into this more, but we need to see some updates to the housing tax credit and housing TIF requirements so that it's easier to use them. We'll be working with the league and other city groups to support these changes, but again, simple way for you to help us do more. I'll tell you what our cities don't really need is that there have been multiple efforts to preempt city zoning authorities in ways, I think that the hope is that these are low-cost ways to increase housing development. But the challenge is if you can't get a developer to your town, it really doesn't matter how it's zoned. The finished product, is going to cost more if you can't get somebody in there to build it. Upzoning, changing standards and stuff like that is not what we need. We really do need help on these other aspects. Honestly, if you want to help our cities, that haven't been upgrading their zoning codes, that's also, again, somewhere we could look for help. But our cities are working on it. They're doing the things that they need to do, but we need help on these other aspects. The other thing I just want to point out is that increasing density, I think, will help add housing in a lot of different places, but it really does need to be tailored to the unique geography, geology, infrastructure of the communities. If we want to increase housing in greater Minnesota, the best way to do that is to tackle the actual problems we have and not one-size-fits-all solutions, that are not going to remedy the problems in greater Minnesota. I listened to Housing First here. I thought they did a great job. I'm looking here at these pictures of houses, and I'm like, come on over. I think if you came to any of our cities and said, we want to put these smaller homes in there, they'll change their zoning for you. It's really challenging. The other thing I just do want to point out is that a lot of testimony we hear about things tends to relate to MSP. The MSP area. Not going to comment on whether it's valid or not valid, but, in greater Minnesota, we do face a lot of differing challenges. It was very interesting to me this fall. We had a number of different conversations with legislators, with others, and we had this conversation specifically dedicated to greater Minnesota. And much to our surprise, we ended up having a developer from greater Minnesota come on there. Never met him before in my life. We did not invite him. We were a little bit like, oh gosh, what's going to happen? It was a great conversation. And one of the things that the takeaway that this developer left with, and he does a lot of housing development up in the St. Cloud area, he just said, look, our communities, they're different. And the solution that's going to work in one area doesn't work in another. And he was thinking about, for example, the Wake Park area, where more than 50% of their housing is rental. What do they want in Wake Park? They're like, my God, we need some more single-family homes to support our tax base. It's a little bit different in the town over. So there's a lot of differences, a lot of challenges, and we want to work with you on the things that really, really matter to us. So thank you. And thank you for taking the time to do this. We appreciate all of your dedication to this important issue.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Weifel. I think our first question on the list is going to be from Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Weifel, question for you. You just said that you'd like to have us pass a number of changes to statute that the cities would like. Are there any, is it a one-directional street? Because I get requests to change statute on behalf of the cities on a regular basis, but is there any other give and take that you also understand that the legislature may choose to change statute in the other direction?
Ms. Weifel.
Boy, I can, there's probably city folks in the back smiling at this. If you'd like, I could go back and get you a list of the unfunded mandates that our cities have been dealing with over the last couple of years. I would say one of the biggest complaints I've been hearing about is, well, I don't know if I want to say, but, paid family medical leave. I know that's something we've heard a lot about. There's just been a lot of other mandates that have been coming down on our cities that have been really hard. And, I think that the concern we have with some of the mandates and some of the stuff coming back, this way, that way, is that a lot of it, again, it's not that we don't want folks to have a say, but it needs to make sense for the 80 counties located outside the metropolitan area. And that's probably where our biggest concern is. But I am not the best at remembering the mandates because I work, not necessarily on those issues, but man, we could probably put a list together for you.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I should have framed my question a little more succinctly for you. We'll constrict it to housing statute because I worked on this for a great many years, and all I ever hear from municipal organizations and others is that you shouldn't do that, you can't do that, why are you doing that, please stop doing that. But what we hear from many of the municipal folks is please change this statute and make it easier for us to do what we think we need to do. So I guess I'll reframe my question is, relative to the housing conversation, is there anything that you're willing to negotiate on with us as we begin to do some of the things that we've been talking about in the last year, or is it seemingly one way?
Ms. Weifel.
Yes, thank you. I do think that there's things we can talk about if we are willing to recognize that different parts of the state need different things. Some of the requirements I've seen are like, you need to get rid of all of your parking in your downtown. Do you know what the temperature was like in downtown Roseau this week? It was really cold. They don't have public transportation. I think that that there are areas that we can negotiate on. I know that you speak a lot about the design requirements, and that's something, again, we might want to, I think we should talk about, but I don't, when I talk to my cities about it, I'm going to be honest, that's one of those ones where they're like, we don't really impose a lot. A lot of those are coming from the homeowners associations. And so, I think that there are some areas that we can discuss. I think the challenging ones is when we're seeing the level, and again, I don't want to, I can't speak for the metro area, I work with Greater Minnesota. The level of density that you might see in one of our cities in Greater Minnesota is going to be different than what's required here. And the challenge is that when you're trying to sort of put that down in every city, it just makes it difficult, and also it sort of ignores what our cities have been doing. And so, when you've redone the zoning code, when you've done it, for example, I met with Brainerd this summer, I visited them. They talked to me about changes they had made to their zoning code to allow for more density. And what did they see? They saw results. They saw, people taking advantage of it and putting more dense housing in. But they were able to do it in a way that matched up with their aging infrastructure. So I don't think it's that we don't want to work with you, but it's trying to do it with some sensitivity to the differing needs of our different communities.
Thank you, Ms. Weifel. Any follow-up, Representative Nash? All right, Vice Chair Dotseth.
Thank you, Chair. And a question I have for the testifier today would be kind of a takeoff of what Representative Nash had, is the mandates that are being placed on some of the developers. Do you feel that that might have an effect on potential restrictions for them wanting to grow in the rural areas? For example, wetland mitigation, et cetera?
Ms. Weifel.
Boy, does wetland mitigation have an impact? I think it could in certain areas. I think that a lot of that is probably beyond the control of cities. I think that, what cities, to the extent they get, involved, obviously, we work with the different agencies on that, but some of those issues, we do have to be careful because we don't want situations where it wasn't done properly and you end up with basements flooding, or, your stormwater, runoff doesn't have anywhere to go and so forth. But I think that there are probably things that have an impact, but I'm not I am not, without having like sort of that in front of me, I can't say whether we can get rid of them or not, because I do know that when we don't pay attention to them, we can have issues, with flooding in cities, with other sort of infrastructure issues. So those can be a challenge, but could they contribute to the cost of housing? I think that's a possibility. I just don't know what we do about some of those things if they are sort of helping us with health and safety and welfare.
Thank you.
Any follow-up, Vice Chair Dotseth?
Just a follow-up question would be, do you see any additional things that could be done to maybe encourage the developers to come to rural Minnesota, Greater Minnesota, to make it more affordable?
Man, I'd love to bring the developers back up here and find out how. I mean, it is, some of when I say our cities have been doing things, I think about some of the examples like, maybe it was Grand Marais, who went down and they literally are going and seeking out developers. And the challenge is again, because you're not building that same volume of housing, a house that would literally cost, maybe $300,000 to build in Representative Nash's district would cost twice as much up there because they've got to bring the developer team in there, put them up in hotels and so forth. So, it would be great to get around in a room and think creatively, how do we get more developers out there? Are there traveling teams we can establish? There's probably, I think, honestly, if we sat down with some of the home builders and developers and started thinking creatively about how to get folks in the rural areas, we could come up with some stuff, but it's dealing with some of those challenges because we need more housing in these areas, but honestly, it's not at the same volume and scale that you need in some of these really fast-growing areas, so.
All right, thank you. And I think in lieu of time, just want to make sure we keep moving through so we can get everyone here today. But I think this is totally outlining why we're having the conversation that we're having today, because obviously we have broken problems all over the state, and we're going to have to find a way to collectively work together as different stakeholders and different groups to find solutions, because if we continue to do the same thing over and over, well, that's the definition of insanity. So thank you for your time, Ms. Weifel.
Thank you.
All right, next on the list will be the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. Welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair Igo. My name is Cecil Smith. I'm the President and CEO of the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. Delighted to be with the committee today to talk about the state of our industry. MHA serves 2,200 members with about 320,000 units of housing in the state. It's approximately half the rental housing stock in the state of Minnesota in advocacy, education, information, and innovation. 2 years ago, we had this cover on our magazine. This is the latest one, The Renter of the Future. But 2 years ago, it was a stormy picture on the state of property management, and it's still stormy and no signs of clearing. Our industry members do develop housing, but they obviously have to operate all of that housing once it's built. And I'll say, look, the greatest headwind that we face right now is interest rates. We can't do anything about that. Nobody in this room can fix that problem. But setting aside interest rates is one of the biggest headwinds for new supply of housing and even the operation of housing as we refinance to higher cost debt. We have other headwinds. And we've got insurance, which, our industry is battling. We'll talk about that. Public safety is one of the chief challenges at some properties, and so on. And there's a few tailwinds, which we'll touch on. Public safety. So COVID, the George Floyd murder, and other social disruption has led to a significant increase in violence, as well as mental health challenges with residents, and obviously that's the population in general, and that's been reflected. That is starting to abate, but obviously we had major challenges with our public safety infrastructure, and those continue. I myself operated multifamily for 16 years. I sold last year. It was just not safe for my family to continue to do so because we were a mom and pop operation operating a large building in South Minneapolis. And it took an hour to get police to respond when we had challenges. And our members and operators across the state are having those challenges in understaffed where there's understaffing in public safety, and that puts great pressure on our frontline staff, our leasing managers, our property managers, our maintenance teams, and we've had resignations due to the stress, due to the challenges that they're facing, dealing with incidents that happen at our properties. We have property taxes, and we're very concerned about the property tax shifts that are starting to happen with the incredible loss of value in office and some retail. For a long time, 2016 through 2020, we endured the largest share of shifts on effective market value, shifting onto apartments. That stopped in 2023. We obviously don't have the 2024 numbers from revenue, but we expect it'll still be double-digit shifts on effective market value. What does that mean overall? Well, in 2024 was the first year that we paid over $1 billion in property taxes as an industry. And our share of property taxes continues to grow, even while our market values are declining because of interest rates. Insurance. So since 2020, we've endured double-digit increases in insurance. In 2023, it was a 25% increase in insurance. This is a top 5 expense at any property. And obviously, we are very concerned because this trend line is very unfavorable as we see larger and larger billion-dollar disaster events. And of course, in the last 2 weeks, we've had the LA fires, a $100 billion event. And why do the LA fires matter to us here in Minnesota? It's because of the structure of the insurance market and reinsurers that insurers in California and fire-prone areas and Florida and the Gulf Coast that are hurricane-prone, those insurers go to the reinsurance market to hedge their losses, and reinsurers have been leaving the market. And this is a national problem. We're in discussions regularly about this challenge. There are no solutions forthcoming. I believe it's going to have to be some federal intervention to incentivize reinsurers to come back into the market. But unfortunately, you can see the map there right across the central part of the country with these billion-dollar storm events that we are prone to now. Of course, we've endured inflation. It's been abating this last year, but we saw not only the run-up in property taxes and insurance that I've already discussed, but employee compensation, because we have seen wage growth, and I'll talk about that as a tailwind for the industry, but also utilities. Cities and utility providers have inflated their pricing. And then just our materials, new appliances, all of these things. Though, if you've bought a new appliance recently, you've been probably shocked at the run-up in prices since the last time you bought a refrigerator or a dishwasher or dryer. Multiply that to the scale of multifamily, and that's incredible costs increases that we've had to face. What happens then is that we have to defer maintenance or CapEx in order to absorb some of these costs. Because cost of capital has gone up, operating expenses have gone up. Where is their relief? It's either the ability to raise rents, which there isn't the ability because the market has not permitted rent growth, and so we absorb it in declining infrastructure, frankly. I mean, the housing stock is older than it's ever been. The multi-housing infrastructure in this country is the oldest it's ever been. And because of measures to abate these inflationary costs, we are deferring capital expenditures to continue to upgrade and improve the properties. And then there's real concern about debt refinancing. We're coming up for another very significant year of refinancing. We have commercial loans that are 5 to 10 year terms. We had a low interest rate environment leading up to 2021, and now it's double what it was, and that's going to be a serious headwind. And then there's regulations, which obviously, pictured there, this body has a role in. These are the regulations that have created additional costs, rent control, inclusionary zoning. We still have the CARES Act 30-day eviction notice. We're hoping that Congress will fix that. The Minneapolis Tenant Protection Ordinances, Brooklyn Center, St. Louis Park, these continue to proliferate and add costs to operations. And then in the 2023-2024 biennium, we had 25 substantial 504B changes, landlord-tenant law changes. At a national level, when we look at the cost of regulation on development, our partners at the Home Builders and National Multifamily Housing Council developed this chart that shows 40% of the cost is regulation and multifamily development. A quarter of that can be attributed to building code changes in the last 10 years. And then fees, more fees over and over again on development. Excuse me. This is the chart that everybody has imagined, the lack of housing, the need to produce more housing. The best way to keep housing affordable is to add more supply. Up for Growth shows that we actually made some progress. In 2019, we were short 80,000 units in the metro region. That improved through very significant production levels of new housing, down to 74,000. Overall in the state, though, as many of you from Greater Minnesota know, that hasn't been happening. We're at a deficit of 100,000 units. The track record on apartment supply was a bumpy year in 2023. The trailing for 12 months we have is for 2024, in quarter 3 was 10,000 units. What I'm concerned about is this dramatic fall off. We're going to have 1,500 units produced in 2026. nearly a tenth of what we were able to do. This is not how we solve our housing supply challenge. However, one mitigating factor is we have had loss of population. And that seems to be returning, but will it return in sufficient numbers? And that's a major challenge outside the scope of this committee to how do we continue to grow our population in Minnesota. A quick tailwind, we're starting to see real wage growth in Minnesota. So for many, many years through 2002, 2015, very anemic real wage growth. And now we're starting to see real wage growth. That means, obviously, that will support higher rents, but it also means folks have more income. Minneapolis metro region is really one of the sweet spot cities because we have had modest rent growth, but real rent growth. Some cities have had no rent growth since 2022 or loss of rents. But we also had wage growth. So in real terms, housing has got more affordable, but we've also had some rent growth so that we could actually support these higher costs that we're facing. And certainly we're doing much better than the country as a whole. And this means that we've got greater affordability, and sadly my colleagues at Housing First have this very challenging story to tell about the cost of single-family development. This is the most affordable rental housing has ever been compared to single-family home ownership. And so renting is the smart choice for folks now. We've got to fix the top line, but we've got to hope that that line of rental costs over time stays as steady as it has been, which means real affordability for Minnesotans and our ability to continue to support the production of new housing. Lastly, just to document what the history of rent growth is and why we're called a steady Eddie market, we never saw the run-up in rents that happened in 2021 through the first part of 2023. We're always around 3% or less in this market. 3% is a great year for rent growth in this market. And so it's a steady Eddie market. We're not one of the volatile markets like Miami or Dallas, Phoenix. We're steady Eddies. And, you know, the mantra, the parable is the steady Eddies win in the end. And hopefully we will have a winning housing market. And that's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Any questions from members of the committee? Well, thank you so much for going through and kind of giving us the history of where it is kind of at and where we're going, but also outlining too the issues that you're facing. I think that's the most important part of why we're doing this hearing today, and we'll continue kind of doing this so that as we're putting together as a committee and working on bills, we bring the perspective of all our stakeholders and try to write the best bills possible. So if there's no further questions from the committee, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
All right, I think next on the list will be the Greater Minnesota Partnership. Welcome, committee, and please introduce yourself for the record.
Yeah, we're positive they're not here.
All right. Hello, representatives, Representative Igo, members of the committee. My name is Darielle Dannon, and I am the Executive Director of the Greater Minnesota Partnership. Thanks so much for having me here today. So I don't want to reiterate too much on what my many colleagues have already iterated today, but I do want to give you a little background of what Greater Minnesota Partnership is, what we do, and then chat a little bit more, somewhat like my colleague, Elizabeth Wayfel already did, to talk a little bit about what's going on in Greater Minnesota, because of course that's where we're focusing. So good to see some Greater Minnesota lawmakers in attendance, of course, as well. So Greater Minnesota Partnership, we're a collaboration of folks across many spectrums, nonprofits, for-profits, businesses. We actually have a number of developers who are our members. We have about 100 members just represented in Greater Minnesota. And really the point of Greater Minnesota Partnership, about 10 years ago, we came together and said, you know, on some of these issues in the economic development space, it would be smart if we sort of worked collaboratively together on some stickier things. And housing wasn't always on that list. Like others have said, and of course why we have this committee is housing is on that list now, because that is a thing that we continually find prohibits people from being able to locate, remain, or relocate to communities, particularly in Greater Minnesota. We hear from employers all the time that they can't attract workers and they can't retain workers because those workers can't find housing. And so we're very concerned about that. Like many of my colleagues, I think all of my colleagues so far today, we're very interested in supporting additional housing development. Any kind of housing development, single family, multifamily, really don't have a preference, but really ensuring that we have the kind of housing that's needed in Greater Minnesota communities. Just to call out a couple of key GMP members, just for members of the committee to know, we have the Ely EDA is one of our members, the Cook County Chamber, Essentia Health, Minnesota Power, the Northland Foundation, and Itasca County. So just give you a little flavor, and of course some of those folks, well, I know, you're feeling the love, Representative. Is it your district? I had no idea. I'm joking. Sorry, Chair. Apologies. Okay, so back to housing in Greater Minnesota. So like I said, there's a number of unique challenges in Greater Minnesota communities, and so that's why we're working on that issue. The big one that I know has been sort of discussed a number of times here already is market failure. And what we've identified in Greater Minnesota, and actually one of the things that's interesting for the prior presentation is that most of that data, a lot of that data was the metro area. And of course, we're really pleased that the metro area wage growth continues to increase, but we're not seeing that kind of wage growth in Greater Minnesota. And Greater Minnesota has continued to lag. We've got about $250 to $500 less weekly wages in Greater Minnesota communities than we do in the metro area. So we have a bigger gap between the cost it takes to build housing, and as some folks have already shared, it costs about the same, if not more, to build housing, single family, multifamily, whatever housing it is, in Greater Minnesota than it does to build it in the metro area. But unfortunately, individuals can't afford to pay as much for either rent or to purchase that housing. And I know that we did share in your packets a little handout that we prepared along with the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. And we did just include in that a little example. It is real data from Crow Wing County, but just to kind of call out sort of what that ends up looking like in practice. And you probably know, obviously you've been door knocking in your districts, you probably are talking to people who are saying, gosh, I can't afford that, you know, $300,000, $400,000 house, new development in your district. And so that's really something that we're very concerned about. The other things that we have identified that continue to be issues that I don't think anyone has touched on is that there are some challenges using state and federal housing tools that are unique to Greater Minnesota communities. And I know it was brought up a little bit earlier. Are there differences between very small communities and very large? And one of those places is that typically in a smaller community, we're not wanting to build a 500-unit multifamily housing development. Often we're wanting to build 6 units, 20 units, 16 units. And so there are a number of programs at Minnesota Housing and federal programs that are really tailored to building those bigger units, particularly tax credit projects. Those are really focused on being able to scale at 40 to 50 units. And for many smaller communities, that's just not an appropriate development in the community. So there's also a lender issue in many Greater Minnesota communities where if there hasn't been development for a significant amount of time, there's no comps. So banks and lenders are very concerned, and we hear this all the time, that they have a real struggle trying to find comps. And that's, for better or worse, probably not something that can be solved here, but just so you're sort of tracking that as an issue. We also have a number of communities that we work with and actually one of our members is contracted. They are a nonprofit housing developer, but they're actually contracted for very small communities, this is in southern Minnesota, to actually be the staff for the city because the city doesn't have any economic development staff who are doing housing. So that's the other one of those real issues is they also then often don't have staff to apply for funding from the state or to even sit down and create things like housing trust funds or other things. So just the complexity of some of the applications that need to happen and just being able to get the funding really sometimes is a real stretch and a challenge for our smaller communities. The other thing I want to touch on a little bit is, and I think this was already shared by one of my colleagues, is that in Greater Minnesota, we're also seeing a greater mismatch between the housing stock and what needs are, particularly around senior housing and senior appropriate housing. And we hear all the time in all the communities that my members are working in that, gosh, they'd really love for grandma who is aging in place quite successfully, but for her to be able to downsize into something a little bit easier for her to care for, and then maybe for a young family to be able to move in there. And that's just not, many communities are saying that that's a need for them, and they don't have that housing. Of course, Greater Minnesota has much more of an aging population than the metro area does. And so I'm going to pivot a little bit to solutions, and then I'll wrap up, Chair. And so just to talk a little bit about, so of course I talked about all the market failures. There's a number of things that my colleagues and I advocated for the last couple of years. We created some new programs. There's a great workforce housing development program. I know some of you have gotten awards from that program in your legislative district. That's something that it's a great program. It's also projected to have a pretty significant drop in funding from the funding it was at 2 years ago. So that's something I would, think about. We think about things like a pipeline, right? So that if a community, and many of the communities that we're doing work in, they've identified parcels of housing that they would like to do development in. They have acquired it already. They're working with developers, and they're really waiting in line to get awarded this kind of state funding that helps close that gap that I already talked about. And so ensuring that we have adequate funding as we continue to move forward, that would be a really big recommendation from me. Another thing is the Greater Minnesota Housing Infrastructure Grant Program. Like I shared, many communities actually have acquired parcels of land to do development on. The challenge is that they're greenfields is what we call them, so they're trees and farmland. And so they don't have any roads or any septic or electricity that's been run to them. And in the metro area, sometimes those costs can either be paid for eventually by the additional buyer of the units or renters, or sometimes the community can help pay for that. But because we have such a significant gap that I already talked about, that market failure, in Greater Minnesota, we created a program to help provide about 50% of the funding for creating the infrastructure so that the housing can get built there. So the community doesn't have to pay for it and the eventual owner or renter doesn't have to pay for it. However, and I know the chair knows this because we flagged it for him and he was nodding earlier, but unfortunately that funding has not rolled out. The legislature appropriated the funds. We're still waiting to have the funding RFP roll out, and I think best guess, the funding rolls out this quarter, the RFP rolls out this quarter. The housing agency would likely spend about 6 months making decisions. It's probably going to be probably over 2 years from when the funding was originally appropriated by the legislature to when the funding's awarded. And then even after that, it's going to take many, many, many months before Minnesota Housing gets the grant contracts in place and the funding actually is awarded to folks to actually put the roads in. So we're pretty frustrated because, like I said, a number of communities, many, many communities have been really working collaboratively to get this housing because they know how much it's needed, and they're sitting on properties right now. So we'd love to see that roll out as soon as possible. Of course, we'd love to see it funded again because it was funded one time. So if there was an ability to put some more funding into that program, that would be super. But gosh, it'd be great to get it out. We do also have a couple of policy changes that I know I've mentioned to a number of you when we've been chatting, including some tweaks to the state housing tax credit program so we can use it better in Greater Minnesota. And then we've been talking a little bit about potentially making changes to the TIF program, tax incremental financing, so that also could be a little bit more flexible in the space of housing. So those are our recommendations, and really, again, we're really aimed at solving the problems that Greater Minnesota faces. I think you all know, everyone who works in and lives in Greater Minnesota knows, first of all, they're fantastic communities. Whenever I work with our members, I'm like, okay, every time I leave to go do a visit and I come back here, which I do live here, and I'm always explaining that I have to live here because no offense everyone, I have to come here, and I like all of you, but every time I leave one of our communities, I'm like, gosh, it'd be amazing to be able to live in, Austin. Anyway, I'm not going to run through names because then I will insult someone here, but again, looking for opportunities to really ensure that those communities continue to be vital communities, great places where people can live and work, and make sure that employers can attract and retain employees in those communities. So with that, Chair, happy to take questions.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Dannon. It looks like we have a question from Representative Scrava.
Chair and Ms. Dannon, I am blessed. I live in Ely. I own a home in Ely. I rent here in St. Paul. I have the best of both worlds. Unfortunately, not everyone gets to have this good of a setup. One of the things, like TIF, it's been around since forever, and developers know how to use TIF. They use it all the time. As far as the dollar amount that was given and that you're not getting, and it is frustrating, because you're not the only one we've heard from. We've heard from a lot of different folks, and it's frustrating to know that the money's there, the demand is there, but we're not getting it. And have you met with developers that are having that trouble, that are trying to decide where they're going to go next or what's going to happen next? Thank you.
Ms. Dannon.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Representative. Representative, I don't want to make anyone feel more jealous on this committee, but you really do live in one of the more beautiful parts of the state, so I'm certainly very jealous. Yes, so let's see, back to your question as I'm thinking about the beautiful place you live in. But yes, absolutely. Greater Minnesota communities, they tend to be in my colleague did sort of allude to this, they tend to be a much more collaborative process to attract developers to do the work. Sometimes there are developers who are from Greater Minnesota communities who are able to do the work. But what we're really talking about when we're talking about some of these policy changes, and in particular TIF, is there's some very strict rules around when TIF is utilized for housing. And so I know we've had some conversations, and we're sort of at the conversation stage of this now, but if there might be some flexibility in some of those rules so the dollars can be utilized for things like potentially there could be surplus funds that could be rolled over into their housing trust fund. So surplus funds could sort of be, gathered up. We created a TIF district. We didn't quite need all the funds. Right now, there's not a way to put those into a local housing trust fund, but we'd love to see something like that so that local communities can just be a little bit more, in control of their own needs. And really, those are their tax dollars. So utilize those tax dollars to put them towards the housing that they need.
Any follow-up, Representative Scrava? Okay, I had to resist the urge to interject there when we're talking about Ely being better than my district, so. Thank you. Is there any other questions from members of the committee? Well, thank you for your presentation and going over those things, and also for bringing those policy ideas to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. And Chair, please don't. Your district is also fantastic. So again, I get into trouble when I start talking about favorites. Thank you, committee.
Thank you. All right, our next testifier on the list will be the Builders Association. So welcome to committee, and please introduce yourselves for the record.
Are you going to start?
Whoever wants to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Grace Kelleher. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Builders Association of Minnesota. For over 50 years, BAM has been the voice of Minnesota's residential construction industry. We represent a diverse membership of home builders, remodelers, developers, and a vast network of professionals who support them, from subcontractors and suppliers to realtors and financial institutions. Our reach extends statewide with 9 local associations working tirelessly to address the unique needs of their communities. We also collaborate with a powerful national organization to advocate for policies that benefit our interest on a broader scale. I am here today with BAM's new president, so he can share his perspective on the critical issues facing Minnesota's housing market and to share some recommendations for building a stronger, more vibrant future for our state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Igo and members of the House Housing Committee. My name is Dale Juntinen. This is my first time, so bear with me of doing this. I've owned and operated my own construction business for 48 years. I live in Representative Igo's district, in fact, not very far from him. I live north of Grand Rapids in Itasca County. I am definitely a different builder than what we're talking about here today. I'm the one that builds the lake homes for Minneapolis people and Chicago and Indiana, and right now we're working for a couple from state of Georgia. So our homes are definitely not in the market price range that you're talking about. But we do have issues, and we represent the whole state of Minnesota with the Builders Association, so some of my talking points today don't really affect me, but some do. So a little bit about myself, because I don't have much to say, so I'll just talk about myself a little bit. I'm a product of back in the 70s when the high schools had VOTEC type courses. You know, we have all afternoon off to go work on a construction site junior year and senior year, and I took that very seriously. I started my business between my junior and senior year, and I actually started a roof truss manufacturing business. I ran that for 10 years. We built garages and pole barns along with that. I did sell it. It's still in operation today. It's on its third owner. We moved into the home market many, many years ago. I was lucky, got a nice lake home to build, and we completed that, and we just kept going. We just kept getting asked to build these homes, so I've been blessed with a good career. So I will go through my deal here. And as a home builder, being in business in the state of Minnesota for many years, I've seen firsthand the evolution of our housing landscape. Today I stand before you not only to highlight the critical challenges we face, but also to offer some concrete solutions that unlock the full potential of home building in our state. Some urgent challenges, the regulatory maze. Minnesota's patchwork of building codes create confusion and compromises safety. A family's security should not depend on their zip code. By enforcing a statewide building code in all counties, we can guarantee every Minnesota has a home built to highest standards of licensed professionals with access to the recovery fund, critical safety net for homeowners. I can comment further on it if you want me to, but another thing is land scarcity crisis, not necessarily my concern. A lack of affordable land, particularly in the metro area, stifles development and drives up housing costs. We need policies that promote land use efficiency and open up new areas for development. Flexibility and innovation are keys to ensuring we can build homes for all income levels. Workforce emergency, that's everybody's problem. The construction industry faces a severe labor shortage, delaying projects and increasing costs. We must invest in vocational training programs, starting in middle school, to introduce students to the rewarding careers available in the trades. Imagine Minnesota state colleges and universities leading the way with a center of excellence for construction, preparing the next generation of skilled builders. Material costs and volatility, skyrocketing material costs and the supply chain disruptions make it increasingly difficult to build affordable homes. The potential impact of the Canadian lumber tariffs, federal concern, or federal issue there, is a major concern as Minnesota relies heavily on imports to meet lumber needs. I hope that works out with Canada, and I got a feeling it will. Some untapped opportunities in the future here, advancements in the construction technology, prefabrication, and even 3D printing offers the potential to revolutionize how we build. These innovations can reduce construction time, lower costs, and create more sustainable homes. I've seen some of that 3D printing on YouTube, and it's pretty amazing. I don't know how it would really work in Minnesota, but that'll come, I'm sure. Streamline the system. We need to simplify statewide building code, streamline permitting processes, Digital platforms can expedite approvals and reduce administrative burdens, allowing builders to focus on what they do the best, building homes. The digital thing is like now the electricians are using it on inspections in the rural areas, which is really nice. I see my electrician a lot of times, he's on a phone and they can go right to the box and wherever they want to go. It's really pretty amazing. That just came in effect now, and that's good. Incentivize land development, encourage development of underutilized land, repurposing of vacant properties through tax incentives and grants. Flexibility in permitting will allow for creative solutions to address housing affordability. In conclusion, the decisions you make today and tomorrow will shape the future of housing in Minnesota. By tackling these challenges head-on and embracing the opportunities before us, we can build a housing market that is robust, resilient, and accessible to all. Let's work together and ensure every Minnesotan has a safe, affordable place to call home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Junton, and thank you for coming down. Like I said, practically a neighbor. Any questions or comments from members of the committee? Well, appreciate you coming down today and appreciate the work that the builders do. Looking forward to our partnership and kind of delving in. Thank you again for bringing those solutions. Like I said, anything from regulations to streamlining is going to be incredibly important. But you also mentioned something we haven't heard a lot about today, which is the building code, which I think is something that we need to look into as well to make sure that we have the right things on our books to make sure we're not only keeping homeowners safe, but we're building the right things and keeping costs affordable for those families that need to get into a home and build a home. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, next on the list will be the League of Minnesota Cities. Welcome, committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
All right, who remembers how to view a slideshow? Boom, got it. Except now this is freezing. Anyways, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, in the interest of time, I will let my technology try to figure itself out. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Daniel Lightfoot. I work for the League of Minnesota Cities as one of our senior intergovernmental relations representatives. The League is the nonpartisan voice of cities across the state of Minnesota. Of the 856 cities in the state of Minnesota, 841 of the cities in the state are members of the League. And I like to point out that we do work very closely with our affiliate organizations. You heard from the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. There are also other League-affiliated organizations that represent subsects of our membership, but their members are our members. And of those 841 cities out of 856, the ones that are not members are generally cities with a population of 200 or smaller. If they give us a call, we're going to help them out. But generally, those cities are very, very small. And I want to point out with the slideshow in your packet that Minnesota is a small city state. Of the 856 cities in the state of Minnesota, 709 of those cities are in greater Minnesota. 706 of those cities have a population of 5,000 or less. And 498 out of that 856 have a population of 1,000 or less. So we truly do have a lot of small cities in this state. And I think it's really important context for this committee, especially when we talk about housing regulation, land use and zoning, things that are really particularly done at the local level. When we talk about the impacts of statewide legislation, generally, I mean, that that legislation has impacts on cities across our state. So I think we have to be careful, and I would encourage this committee to be careful not to extrapolate some of those market considerations and market challenges in the 7-county metro area, of which we are certainly aware of, and extrapolate that to the entire state. And I think it's really important that when we think about legislation on the housing topic, that we understand that, when you've been to one of those cities, you've been to one of those cities. There are vastly different needs from city to city, from the greater Minnesota area to the 7-county metro area. And we really encourage consideration from this committee that anything that we do that has statewide impacts has that in mind, that legislation can be tailored to those individual community needs. Now, in addition to that, the league is tasked with representing all cities across the state, and one of the things that I think has been a topic today is the topic of zoning and land use. And I want to spend a little bit of time on sort of what is zoning, because I think that term gets thrown around quite frequently. And zoning is an incredibly important tool that benefits communities both economically and socially, and improves health and wellness, and helps also conserve the environment. It is the reason you don't have a heavy industrial building next to single-family owner-occupied housing, or factories popping up in the middle of a manufactured home park community, et cetera. It is the way that cities ensure communities are laid out effectively, and that there is the best use of land available, highest and best use of land available in a community. I think you heard a little bit ago from Mr. Foster that identified that sort of zoning always equals increase in money and dollar signs, and I would push back on that a little bit. We do use zoning and land use and the plan unit development process oftentimes to ensure affordability. There are cities that have created single-family zoning districts that do allow for the exact type of starter home that the Builder Association is claiming they cannot build or is illegal. So I think it's important that we consider the innovation that has happened at the local level. There are a number of cities that have rolled out the red carpet for that exact type of product, only to be met with a developer that wants to max out setbacks, have variances to build a larger home on a smaller lot. That said, zoning is also important for social and civic life. It preserves historic and culturally significant properties. It ensures adequate public infrastructure like water, wastewater, stormwater. It maintains parks and trails. And it's important for environmental conservation as well. But I think if you look at a zoning map from the Ely area, and you look at a zoning map from where Representative Myers' district is in the Lake Minnetonka area, those two maps are going to look vastly different based on geographic and topographic issues that ensure that a city lays out its city in an appropriate way to ensure that the highest best use of that land is done for residential development, and to ensure that you don't have any environmental considerations of stormwater runoff going into Lake Minnetonka, or issues with precious metals, et cetera, in the Iron Range. In addition to that, I want to talk a little bit about how cities have been meeting the moment through local innovation. I think the headlines on this topic often starts with the rain cloud that Cecil talked about, and sort of the doom and gloom. And absolutely, we have to acknowledge that both the states and cities play a role in addressing the housing crisis in this state. We are hundreds of thousands of units short, and I have not talked to a single city official across this state that has said, nah, we're good on housing, we think we're just going to do it business as usual. We share in that goal, and we want to work with our developer partners, both the folks, the big national home builders in the Twin Cities, and the Dales in our communities, to help make sure we address those locally identified housing needs. But those are a lot different from city to city. And this slide that I have here captures a few of the stories that have been written about cities addressing this issue through local innovation, but doing so in a way that has community input, that has involvement with the community to really tailor those approaches to those individual communities. And it's not just in the metro. It's small cities, it's large cities that are doing things like reviewing their zoning and land use ordinances, working with developers to address concerns, because at the end of the day, we want to get to yes too. We want the development as well. And so I think it's important that we also reflect that the state also plays a role in supporting that local innovation rather than replacing it with heavy-handed approaches that seek to sort of treat both the Elys and the Minnetonkas the exact same. So I just want to spend just a little bit of time on, our session priorities a little bit. We certainly as an organization play an important role in the conversation around housing and how cities can work with the states to support goals that we share on development. I think in addition to working with this committee, generally our goals this session are as follows. Any legislation that impacts land use and zoning or any housing legislation that this committee considers needs to certainly encompass the entire housing spectrum rather than just simply focusing on the construction of new market rate units. There are policies and resources available to both help on the overall production side of things, but also help to target that level of affordability. And absent those resources, it is very hard for the developer community and cities to support affordable development. In addition to that, we urge this committee and the legislature to support local innovation through policies and resources that, again, bolster those local efforts that we've seen take place, rather than negatively impact their existence. In addition to that, I think factoring in the market differences across the state of Minnesota and tailoring those policies and resources to those community-specific solutions are really important as well. And then lastly, incentivizing that innovation through policies and resources, again, rather than that sort of one-size-fits-all approach that treats a built-out city and a greater Minnesota city with a lot of greenfield available the exact same way. And then lastly, I want to just talk about a few priorities that don't have anything to do with kind of the local land use authority aspect. One that my colleague Daryl Dannon mentioned is modifying a few existing programs, including that state housing tax credit modification, which I know, Mr. Chair, you are going to be carrying that bill on that piece, which will help that tool be better utilized for greater Minnesota cities. In addition to that, there are two programs that for the first time were passed last session that provides formula-based aid to cities based in population to address local affordable housing needs, both the local affordable housing aid and the statewide affordable housing aid program. The modifications that we would recommend to those are expanding some of the horizon of when those funds have to be used. Development doesn't always happen as fast as we'd hope, especially in greater Minnesota when we're trying to attract development. And then in addition to that, my colleague Dariel also mentioned the tax increment financing flexibility piece. And then one that I want to mention that I think Cecil talked about a little bit earlier, the Multi-Housing Association, is support for the adaptive reuse tax credit. We do have challenges, not just in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but across the region of commercial industrial properties that have cratering valuations based on lack of use. And so there's a lot of great work happening in adapting those buildings to be serviced as residential housing, as multifamily housing. Those projects are expensive to do, primarily because the infrastructure in place is not built to service a residential use. And so we're supporting that adaptive reuse tax credit as well. And then lastly, Mr. Chair, and I'll wrap up, Resources, of course, we're a little tight on dollars this session, this biennium, but one resource that is really important is appropriations bonds for housing infrastructure bonds that we would recommend this committee consider another authorization. Extremely important for cities and their developer partners, both on the public sector side for public housing, federally assisted housing, but also on the private development side. And then just preventing a reduction in the Minnesota housing budget, especially for programs that directly assist cities and their developer partners of building and preserving also housing in our communities. Looking forward, Mr. Chair and members, to working with you all this session. We want to continue to be a resource to you, and certainly will be available for questions now and in the future if anything comes up that impacts cities. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Lightfoot. I believe we had a question from Representative Mecklin to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lightfoot, a question I would have is, you talk about the city-by-city approach. Some of the latter ones you mentioned is the modification of commercial industrial properties. I've been sitting here having these conversations in a legislative capacity since 2019. Is this a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, entire generation? In the last 6 years, our cost of housing keeps skyrocketing out of the reach of so many more and more people. I get the interest rates is beyond the state control, but 2023, we threw $1 billion, or my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, to do this problem, and yet here we are 2 years later sitting with a greater problem. What is the city-by-city approach?
Mr. Lightfoot.
Mr. Chair, Representative Mecklin, yes, certainly appreciate the question. There are many cities that are leading on this issue in terms of addressing the levers and pulling the levers that we can to address some of the headwinds that we have in this market. I think it's important to point out that a lot of those headwinds are completely outside the control of local units of government. When you look at wage stagnation, when you look at availability of workforce, when you look at the cost of labor and materials, those things are hard to address at a local level. That said, I think you have plenty of examples, and I'm happy to share more with this committee of cities that have taken an inward look and have addressed some of the challenges in the market with the levers that we can pull. But they've done so in their own individual communities with input from members of their community that can address their own locally identified needs, rather than having a sort of statewide broad approach foisted on them. And so I think as this conversation continues, we have to hold harmless those cities that have done a lot of work at this level, and work with the rest of our member cities to highlight those best practices so that we can continue to work with the state and our developer partners of addressing this issue.
Representative Mecklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find it, it's frustrating. I talk to a lot of friends that are developers, obviously a lot of colleagues that are in the building industry. I hear kind of a repetitive thing of all the fees, the regulatory, the cost here versus neighboring states. Obviously, the materials are the materials, sorry about that. But at the same time, I can look at cities like Rapid City, Brookings, cities in Wisconsin, Indiana, and they seem to have figured something out that others are not. And that people can actually buy an affordable or get into a house maybe a few years sooner, because here, obviously, it's so much more expensive. And, we've had conversations in the past several years. I think it was House File 4006 was kind of an edgy one last year, or 2023, whatever it was. But as Representative Nash said earlier before he left, that we have the townships, the cities, the counties, they come to us when they have something that they need, but when the citizenry pushes back, they don't want to, it seems like it's a one-way push all the time. And we've been seeing this even before I ran for office, this constant push that you had to have this aesthetic thing or this typical type of thing, or you had to have this big of lots. But especially when we were going into the millennials becoming of age to live by their own homes, And after the rollout of universal design, they wanted smaller lots. They wanted low maintenance. They didn't like doing stuff. They wanted like the HOA life. But you have these zonings are saying, no, you must have lots this big, you must have all these other amenities that people aren't asking for. And I'm just asking if there could be a conversation at some point to address what the actual consumer is looking for right now. And maybe some of these smaller cities that want to boom, I hope maybe they just take a leap of faith and watch they boom like nobody else has. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Meckland. I believe Representative Johnson, you had a question. Oh. Any other questions from members of the committee? All right. Thanks, Representative. Thank you, Mr. Lightfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I believe, like I said, we're just running a little bit. We got about 10 minutes left. If there's anyone here for open. No. Representative Scott, we are done at 4:45.
I have a question then.
Well, we have open testimony now. So I believe there's a few folks that signed up for open testimony that I want to make sure we get to today. So welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, my name is Cap O'Rourke. I'm the Executive Director of Minnesota Association of Small Cities. I advocate on behalf of the 706 cities with populations under 5,000. With all the discussion about small cities, I will try to be quick. I think what we are hearing from our community members is there is a great need for housing. We have been working, but I will say, our communities differ in what they need. You may have a community like Chatfield down by Rochester, which largely their population lives in Chatfield and goes and works in Rochester. So they are like your traditional bedroom community, and they are in need of more affordable housing. And sometimes they're looking for some levels of affordability, but a lot of workforce housing. But you also get a community like Perham, Minnesota. Perham is a community of about 3,000, just under 4,000, but I think they have a working population of over 5,000. They have people driving there from 65 miles away to go and work in Perham, and they can't live there because there's no affordable workforce housing. We have serious needs, but they are diverse, and there isn't and I would, Senator or Representative Meckland, the concept of a developer coming into a small city and having a boom, we would love to see that. Our small cities bend over backwards to try to be as accommodating as they can to developers. The reality is where most of our cities and communities are, developers just simply aren't that interested in putting out significant investment for the number of properties that they would have. They're looking for the communities that are growing the fastest. Our biggest concern, and frankly our biggest frustration, is 2 years ago, this legislature the legislature passed a significant investment in housing, over $1 billion. Two specific programs were targeted at communities, small communities like those that I represent. And the fact that neither one of those programs have even taken applications is absurd. It is absolutely absurd. I have been on phone calls with Housing Finance Agency. We've had lunch and learns with Housing Finance Agency last year talking about these programs. We have cities ready and wanting and excited. I knew that these programs were going to be, there were new programs and there were going to be some tweaks, as there always are. We were hoping that these programs would be rolled out, that our cities could have applied and some of the money could be coming out, and then we could give you feedback of this is working, this isn't working. By the end of this legislative session, we may just have cities applying. And the fact that that's where we're at, hopefully I can come back to you this fall on both of these programs and say, this is the number of applications so you can see that there is a need. I have no doubt that there will be a need, but the fact that we haven't been able to invest and go forth with these programs is extremely frustrating. So I think that if we want to address the housing needs in small cities, we do have to be flexible. We do have to acknowledge that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, but I do hear your concerns that there are communities that have odd fees and requirements and aesthetic requirements that the vast majority of our small cities don't, and it's very frustrating for builders. So my biggest urge is to get the Housing Finance Agency to move a lot faster than they have been moving. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. O'Rourke. And I'll just say, yeah, with this thing we're definitely looking into because, yeah, those programs haven't been set up. We have requests in already to the agency to provide us timelines, where the money's at. And this committee will be doing a deep dive into that. So looking forward to partnering with you on it.
And I would add, and I've told the Housing Finance Agency with this, and I will say this, if you hear me in other committees, I will say this. If you have programs that you are expecting small cities to participate in, one, the application has to be simple. Many of our communities are staffed by one person, maybe two people, and they are doing all the same requirements that the large cities do. And so if they have to then all of a sudden fill out a 10-page housing application, that probably is just a barrier in and of itself. And you usually have to set aside money, which is how we got these two programs. We set aside money targeted to small cities. It just hasn't been utilized yet.
It's a very good point. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank
I think
you.
we have one more. I want to make sure we get to him. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Okay, good afternoon. Luke Hellier, Mayor of Lakeville, and I thought I'd just offer a little bit about what's happening in my community, in our suburbs, and just give you a little bit of feedback. So, Mr. Chair, thank you for having us today. As one of the fastest growing cities in the country, in fact, the 30th fastest growing city in the country, Lakeville is fully committed to ensuring that our growth is balanced, sustainable, and inclusive. Our city understands the importance of providing a wide range of housing options to meet the diverse needs of our residents, both current and in future. In fact, between 2020 and 2023, Lakeville saw nearly 3,500 new residents, which is the largest increase of any city in the state. Over the past several years, we've worked with builders and developers to create a variety of housing types that reflect the evolving needs of our community. In 2024 alone, we built 89 apartment units, 149 townhomes, which is just another way of saying a single-family home on a small lot, and 285 single-family homes. Lakeville is home to families, young professionals, retirees, and others, each requiring different types of living. To address this, we've taken proactive approaches to collaborate with developers on a few key initiatives. We're actively working to expand the availability of single-family homes and townhomes by ensuring a mix of housing types. We cater to residents at various income levels and stages of life. We also are committed to providing workforce housing options for low and moderate income households. Through zoning adjustments and partnerships with nonprofit developers, we're making strides in increasing the number of affordable units without sacrificing the quality of life. We've also acted with reviewing zoning laws to allow for greater flexibility in the types of housing that can be built, while also ensuring that new developments are aligned with the city's long-term vision for growth. This includes our efforts to look at parking minimums, lot size, garage size, and construction materials. Our Planning Commission is currently reviewing these changes. We also recognize the importance, as others have said, about engaging with current residents and stakeholders during this process. Our city regularly holds public hearings, open houses, and workshops to ensure that new housing developments reflect the needs and concerns of our current residents. However, as much success as we've had, we continue to have challenges. Cities don't build homes, builders build homes. Our city median price for sale in Lakeville right now is about $450,000. Yet it's becoming more difficult for young families to purchase a home, which you've heard here today. However, new construction will never solve the starter home issue, nor will the state preempting a city's ability to manage our land and zoning. Our problem really is twofold in our community. Because of our various stages of growth, half of our residents do not even have school-age children, so 78,000 people in our city, and half of those households have no school-age children. So there simply isn't really enough housing stock for seniors or empty nesters to downsize while still maintaining the value and equity that they built up in their home. We believe our continued encouragement to builders will help drive some of that need. And as residents downsize, there's a tremendous opportunity for families to move into those homes. And the other issue that was addressed here today, and that's mortgage rates are just simply too high. And I don't have a solution. I don't think any of you do really either. As Lakeville continues to grow, we're committed to maintaining our city's reputation as a place where all residents can thrive. And we recognize the challenges that come with rapid growth, but the continued support, working with developers and planners, and those of you in this room, we're confident that building a community that is vibrant and inclusive is possible. Thank you for the time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions or get you to wherever you need to be. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hellier. Is there any questions before we close out here? Awesome. Thank you for being here today. We look forward to working together. All right, committee members, that wraps up our agenda for the day. One last final note, the rules, was there any additions or changes that anyone saw in those rules? If not, you'll be getting an email. Those will become the official rules of the committee. All right, seeing no further discussion, thank you for everyone's time today. We are adjourned.